Good morning, welcome back. Let's get started for today. We've got a number of folks who are joining us through Zoom, so thanks for doing that. And today's class is building on the idea of group leadership and continuing to think about what it means to be a good leader and how we can use qualities of team leadership in our own groups and organizations. Just as a quick reminder before we get started on today's prompt, that we are not meeting in class next Monday. I'm going to have a prompt for you available on Canvas to do instead, just to account for attendance for that day. So not meeting in class next Monday, but we'll be meeting on Friday and then the following Wednesday. All right, so what I want you to do is to take some time to think a little bit about clubs, activities, organizations. These could be ones offered at EOU. These could be ones that are offered kind of virtually in a lot of different locations. These could also be ones in the broader community or area that you're interested in. And these could be groups or activities that you're not currently a member of, but you're interested in learning a little bit more about, maybe attending a meeting. So take some time to think a little bit about this. And these should be groups that have some sort of meetings that you could attend. For instance, synchronous meeting that's happening face-to-face, a remote meeting happening through something like Zoom, FaceTime, and so on. If you have a device with you, such as a phone or laptop, I want you to take some time to look at some of the clubs and activities that are offered here at EOU, just to do a quick browse of some of the things that are available. And then after that, I want you to write down 3 organizations or clubs or groups on campus that you're not part of, that you're maybe interested in observing or learning a little bit more about. This initial brainstorming for today does not mean that you're required to do one of those groups. It's just a chance for you to start to think about what you might want to explore for this project. Again, I really recommend locking down a club or activity or organization that you're going to observe this week so that you have plenty of time to work on that small group observation assignment.
Which was 3, not 1.
For this brainstorming process. For the actual essay, you would only choose one, but this is a chance to get started. Yeah. Think about which of those you might want to choose. It's good to start with multiple options in case like meetings and things don't work out, or you're not allowed to go to one of them. That sort of thing.
Is an athletics team considered a small group that you would consider for this project?
If they have like a meeting, like a session where they run through strategy or talk about or do some types of updates, and it's not like it's just practice, then yeah, absolutely. You want to check in with the coach just to make sure that you could go to that meeting. you already have a good sense of some of the clubs or activities that you're interested in observing. One really good next step to do, if you have extra time, is to start to draft an email or message to a leader of that group to see if you can observe. After class, I'll post kind of a template that shows a way that you could go about making that kind of contact. But it's definitely good to reach out early and see if there's a meeting that you'd be available to attend. Okay. If you tried like downloading it as like a top. Also try to share the link. Yeah, so I would do that. There should be in the lower corner of the link icon. And if you just share the link, the extra people have access to that. Yeah, also if you're still running into issues, you have to office hours and work on it. Take another minute or so, look around a bit. It's okay if you're hitting a little bit of a dead end or you're not quite sure where to go yet. Another thing that I encourage is you're making contact with a group and maybe trying to figure out how to get time set up is, for instance, you could mention that you could names of the group member as anonymous, or use something like pseudonym in order to ensure that like the people that you're observing on are not called out by name in your assignment. Sometimes groups feel better if you do that. And just to explain, hey, I'm just going to be in the corner on my laptop, just taking a few notes, learning about the group. And I think also being transparent about the assignment. So you're in a small group communication class and you're just learning some of the ways that small group communication happens and group members work together. Will help people have their guard down. So I'll share kind of a template after class that you could use to send out that contact. I also, again, encourage you to think about a club or organization by the end of the week and make that initial contact and then work from there. Remember, you've got until March 6th to work on this. So you do have a good amount of time to continue to think about this. If you're running into a wall or you're not sure about an organization to observe, again, I'm happy to help with developing and exploring ideas. So hang on to this for now. We'll do a part 2 of your attendance for today in just a little bit. I just wanted to take some time to get you thinking about this coming up assignment. So we talked about a little bit in this assignment last class. Again, it's an observation of a group you're not a part of, and it lets you apply and use some of the skills of small group communication to understand how this group behaves. We also talked a little bit about leadership, some of the practices that make for good leaders. Yeah, just have that on your radar as coming up. What I'll also do is at the end of the quarter, I am asking people to present and to share the group that they observed and some of the things that they learned. What I'll be doing is linking you a calendar to indicate your availability. So I've blocked out the final week of the quarter, that week 10, and I think that's the March 5th, 7th, and 9th, and I'll let you indicate the days you're available for, or maybe prefer to meet, and we'll be able to work in a schedule with that. Last class, we talked about the idea of a leader. Again, you all shared examples of good leaders that you've encountered in your lives and situations where you've been leaders yourselves. Some of the common trends were openness, accessibility, the sort of insight and wisdom that lets people conquer and deal with difficult challenges. Those are definitely things we really look for, that leaders understand the dynamics of an issue and context, and that they're people that in many ways observe and practice the things that they preach, right? A leader who doesn't do what they say others should do is not a good example. And we also touched on this idea that leadership, we tend to assume is genetic, that you're a born leader or natural leader. But in reality, a lot of people who are not necessarily born to be or thinking that they're born to be leaders end up taking on leadership roles really, really well. Again, conversely, a lot of people who think they're good leaders turn out not to be because they haven't developed those skills. We also talked a little bit last class about some of these categories of leadership. We talked about some of the traits or behaviors that leaders have. For instance, insight, responsiveness, the ability to engage actively on issues. We talked about the idea of a situation or context in which leadership happens. For instance, maybe you're working in a group and suddenly you have like a tech expert comes in and shows everybody how to use a microphone properly. Functional leadership is leadership that's focused on a task or goal. For instance, a functional leader might be one that's somebody like your advisor who has the goal of helping you to graduate, to fill out your schedule, and to take good classes. And then transformative leadership, right? This could be somebody a really meaningful coach. A lot of people mentioned having coaches and other people like that that have taken on a role that has changed their lives and built up motivation. So transformative leaders really adopt that perspective. It changes the way that group members think and allows that experience to last. For this class, we're going to build on some of these ideas and talk about situations or contexts that cause people to become leaders, some of the strategies that allow people to do a good job of leadership, and then an activity where I'm asking you to apply and use some of these skills in group leadership too. I just wanted to share, there was a recent article that came out that was a kind of academic debate on whether leadership was born and innate or something that was made or developed over time. Some interesting arguments on either side. But what the researchers ultimately concluded was that the innate qualities, the born qualities, amount for only up to about 30% of the qualities you might see in leadership. So that other 70% really comes from skills that are developed over time. The idea that talents are wasted if they're not combined with skills. Maybe you have really good communication skills, but you don't know how to use them in working in a group. The idea you have to be motivated and figure out your strengths and experiences to work well in a group. The idea that good leaders are the product of hard work. And history tells us, right, that there have been a lot of examples of bad leaders. If you have taken like an ancient or older history class, it followed the history of a lot of monarchies, you know that typically things get passed down until there's a leader that doesn't do so well and causes the country or monarchy to not have a very bright future. So again, just kind of an interesting way of looking at it. Some of the reasons that there might be innate skills involve leaders not necessarily being able to describe what it means to be a good leader. Traits like humility, that might be things that are useful. So again, there's interesting perspectives on this debate. I just wanted to highlight some key arguments and findings that have come up on this idea. If you've ever seen, there's a show that got moved over to Netflix last year called Designated Survivor. It's kind of fun. I think it's an example of an emergent leader. The idea here that we oftentimes like TV shows, films, so on, that ask like a leader to be thrust into a situation, right? We like watching characters who are sort of in over their heads and transform or develop to become these natural leaders over time. TV show that I really enjoyed, I'm a big sci-fi nerd. I really enjoyed the show Battlestar Galactica, right? And one of the premises of that show, right, is that the entire planet is destroyed, the population escapes on a spaceship, and the presidency goes so far down that the Secretary of Education is sort of thrust in the role of a president. So it's interesting when we watch TV shows, films, and so on to see people that are put in leadership situations that are forced to suddenly grow and adjust to some of those contexts. So leadership situations take on a lot of different forms, right? This idea first is somebody that is an appointed leader. A good example of this is if there is a team captain or group leader and somebody like your coach has appointed or selected them to be the captain of the group, right? So generally speaking, an appointed leader is somebody that higher up has been decided to be the leader or manager. Oftentimes in those situations, right, we might be a little bit skeptical. Why is this person the leader? I don't really know them. Why were they chosen? We might feel frustrated that we're not involved in the process. But at the same time, an appointed leader might carry a certain degree of authority or credibility with them. That you know, okay, this person is an expert, and therefore you should defer to their leadership. So an appointed leader has strengths and weaknesses. I think oftentimes that comes down to whether or not you trust that they should have been chosen as a leader. But that's one style. A democratic leader is an interesting example, right? It's a leader or representative that's chosen by the group. Really good example of this is ASPOU, right? Or on the faculty end, we have things like faculty senate, where certain students or faculty members are elected to or hold leadership positions because they were voted to do so. You can think about the broader political system in the United States as having this kind of democratic leadership style too, that people choose who to put their faith in. Some advantages of that means that the democratic leader really feels representative to or responsive to the interests of people, that people have put their faith and trust into this person. One downside is that in democratic leadership, it can also be easy for the tides to turn against you, right? Or your like you're not representing or a good reflection of what the people wanted or voted for. So oftentimes this democratic leader has to straddle the line between their responsibilities, appointed to a role, but also to appealing to the people that supported them in the first place, right? And again, this idea of an emergent leader, somebody who develops into that role, sort of tracks it. Wanted to show a clip from that TV show, Designated Survivor. This is a fun little example, again, of how we can think about emergent leaders and this idea of leadership more broadly.
Who is this?
Your daughter?
Oh, that's not possible. My daughter's asleep, and I know that because I kissed her goodnight almost 2 hours ago.
When are you and mommy coming home?
There are times when we make history. You're going to be asleep by then, right? And there are times when history makes us.
Good night, Dad.
And I love Pete. And I'm sure you that the same American peace, shared by our father, our mother. It's weird. Yeah, I was just in black too. Like, what the hell is going on? Yeah. Mike, please, just tell us what you know.
Capitol's been attacked. Congress, gotten. Eagle is gone. Sir, you are now the president of the United States.
This is the most devastating attack on our country since the
Like responsibility?
Not yet.
This guy's never been elected to anything.
Did you know President Richmond's hiring this morning? Now he's the president.
Maybe he'll realize he has no business running the country.
We're in a state of war. Tom Kirkland is not going to get us through this.
That's not scary.
Me. You really believe I should step down?
I do.
You might be right. But for now, I'm going to
Kind of fun as an example of this idea of the emergent leader. Obviously a very extreme example, but some of the things that I think kind of stood out in this idea of the emergent leader, right, is first of all, that oftentimes an emergent leader doesn't necessarily ask for the role, right? You're put in an emergency situation. For instance, a lot of healthcare workers in the United States find themselves in that role because a lot of supervisors or leaders were sick and not able to come to work. So, or situations where like all of the other employees are sick or unable to come in and you suddenly are put into this role. So another thing that kind of emerges is this idea that people don't necessarily have trust or faith in you. Why are you the leader? You're not the person that should be in this role. You should step down. Credibility can definitely be a challenge. Also, this issue of confidence, of not feeling like you're in a position to effectively lead the group, can be another concern that comes up too. But again, in a lot of shows like this and situations where emergent leaders get into these roles, they grow into it and use some of the skills that they already have and learn how to apply them to their group of fiction. For instance, this character's relationship to his daughter and this level of empathy or care for others is something that translates into leadership skills. So just some good examples here of some of the ways that we find ourselves taking on these leadership roles. Given that, right, there's a lot of things that can impact somebody being a good or effective leader in the group. One of the biggest things that we need to avoid when we're leaders, as we mentioned before, is this idea of being a dictator, of having this kind of militaristic role in the group. Because when you take on that role, your rules or guidelines are not things that people will trust if you don't follow them yourself. And we oftentimes find that we'll feel frustrated or lack trust if we take on that type of role. One of the biggest things, again, is to lead yourself and to show the group the way that you want it to be. Good example of this is maybe you are respectful, you listen, you take notes, and really engage with people's perspectives in a meeting. Recall from earlier in the quarter that we tend to observe and do the very things that we notice other people in the group doing. So if you set a good example, that goes a long way. Again, avoid becoming a dictator in a group. Be open, again, to the idea that things can happen in a slightly different way. Maybe your group divides up into slightly different teams, or maybe you figure out a really interesting and exciting solution to a problem that you never would have imagined first. So let that opportunity for growth happen. Valuing diversity is important. We've talked a little bit about culture and the relationship between things like culture, gender, and identity to being a member of a group. It means really helping to take into account experiences of people for whom English might not be the first language, accounting for things like race, gender, sexuality, sexual orientation, class, nationality, and so on. And viewing diversity as something that enhances the overall group and experience. Showing commitment, right, that you generally care about and want to be a leader. Some of the worst kinds of leaders are the ones that seem asleep at the wheel or just aren't available to answer questions if you try to reach out to them. Focusing on results. Remember that when group members have meetings and work together, right, the meeting isn't the point. The solution or the issue that you're hoping to gain out of the meeting is. In those situations, oftentimes doing things like sending out an agenda, providing minutes, and other forms of support can really ensure that your group works together. Showing appreciation, really highlighting, hey, you brought in a great idea, or I really appreciate the work that you put into the group. Appreciation really goes a long way. Leaders learn. Again, if you are like a member of the cabinet and you suddenly become president, there's a lot you have to learn, including like the nuclear security codes and all of that, right? That when you're in a leadership position, there is a lot that you're going to have to figure out. And it also means giving yourself the space, not to get it right or to be perfect the first time. Maybe you're a team captain and practice doesn't go so well, maybe there's an injury. The key thing here is that you've learned from that experience and created a more constructive way to deal with similar problems that come up. A plan, again, something like an agenda or an approach is a good one. Remember that there is a spectrum of autocratic to more participative forms of group leadership. And so in this more participative or democratic form, you're saying, hey, here's an issue, here's a way we can address this issue. What do you all think? What's your input? How can we work on this solution together? And then lastly, understanding the roles and responsibilities people have, right? It's like putting the round peg in the round hole, square peg in square hole, right? It's figuring out, okay, this member of the group really likes to work alone, but is really good at this specific task. These two are kind of chatty and don't really get on task. They're working together, so we split them up. Understanding the sort of individual parts and roles of the group, the skills that people have, and maximizing those skills goes a long way for groups going well. The really key idea here is the idea that good groups and good leadership from groups develops a sense of community. That a good leader is somebody who is not just able to run the ship well, but naturally creates opportunities for people in the group to connect. If you think about some of the favorite groups that you've been a part of, there's a good chance that it wasn't only that the team leader or coach did a good job, but that you liked your teammates, got along with and had good relationships with other people. Good leadership helps to facilitate and make that kind of environment happen. For instance, I mentioned before that I did speech and debate in college, grad school, and some of my favorite moments were the times when we were driving to tournaments and we just had like these long conversations where members of the team really got to know each other and understand each other. For instance, our coach would give the opportunity for each person on the team to ride shotgun and play some of their favorite music. There's a really fun way for us to learn about everybody in the group based on their music. I was always the person that did like indie rock. That's my thing. So it's kind of fun to share a little bit about that. So this idea of community where people can work together, engage with one another, share their values and interests is a really important thing that a group leader can help to foster. Creating opportunities where people feel comfortable, feel able to share things about each other to others. It not only helps the group members work together better and more efficiently, really helps improve the mental health and well-being of the group too. In fact, under COVID, right, one of the challenges we felt is that we don't have that same sense of community and of collaboration with one another. I was at a job last year And even though I taught for a full year, I never met any of my colleagues face to face. And that's definitely a challenge of building community. When it comes to online leadership and working together effectively online, there's also a set of practices that you can do to make that run as smoothly as you can. Again, most of us are not a fan of Zoom meetings, but oftentimes we're going to be forced into positions where we're using a remote or online communication to connect. Clear expectations and goals are a really big thing, right? When you are asking people to engage online, you need to be clear with them what you're expecting them to do in the meeting, including their level of involvement. Is this a meeting that they can idle for, do something like laundry while it's running in the background, or do they need to actively participate? You requiring camera on or off? What's going on? Additionally, organizing the meeting well, right? Turn your microphone on, check the chat. Those are a couple basic steps, but also just to make sure that you have things like the link available, that you understand and know how to operate. So for a lot of programs like Zoom, they'll give you the option to host or create your own meeting just as a test meeting. I really recommend doing that if you're hosting something like a Zoom meeting for the first time. That way you can play around with things like screen sharing, the chat, the video, all of that stuff. You might also recommend that people switch over to the gallery view, right, or the Brady Bunch view. This lets people more clearly see each other as they're talking, makes it easier to pick up on nonverbal cues. Using prompt and meaningful responses. Again, because in a lot of these virtual groups, there's a lot of subtext and nonverbal communication that's missing. Making your communication as clear and direct as possible to substitute in for that is a good idea. And again, keeping things positive. When we're engaging online, showing this level of interest in others is a really important way to engage. Another key idea here is about creating socialization, right? As I mentioned before, a good leader is somebody that creates a team or group of people that, without the leader present, is going to have a good relationship and talk and get to know one another. That you create a level of comfort and camaraderie that exists even when you're not around. In fact, it also means the leader themselves, even though they have some level of power and authority, is able to collaborate with and have good conversation with members of the group. You might recall last week when we talked about meetings, the idea that a good leader can create a positive tone at the beginning of the meeting, sharing something good or fun or exciting. Again, my team leader in a research group would start by giving us these like silly magnets that had puns on them. I had one that said "no problema" and it had a little love on it. And it was so silly and goofy, but it was such a fun way to feel like a part of the group and to feel like I was able to engage and learn from members. So keeping things positive is a really good way to help the group start out well. And this idea, right, that you are not just leading a group, but that you are creating a team that works together to solve a problem, to address an issue, to achieve a goal, can come down to a few elements as well. First of all, that the members of the team know what they're trying to do. For instance, maybe we all are really passionate about and love tech and want to talk about or build that up. I have a student who is really interested in sort of building this sort of like online role play group. And so creating sort of rules and guidelines of that group is a big part of that. Place for the group to meet. Are you meeting virtually, face to face? You have a room. Oftentimes having this common space or room, like a team room or squad room, is a great way for people to work together. Leadership from within. Again, being a good leader, practicing the things that you're supposed to do for other people, being open, communicative, transparent. Norms and rules are important, right? Figuring out what's appropriate or respectful for the members of a group to do. Letting people occupy a different range of roles. Again, depending on when you think back to the Belden self-perception inventory, people take on a lot of different things. Maybe they're really interested in innovating, presenting new ideas. Maybe they're really interested in just working hard. Maybe they're really experts in a specific task. Depending on that role, figuring out that role to really let people blossom in the area that works for them. Another thing that creates a good kind of team leadership-oriented environment is giving people the opportunity to form their own smaller groups or divide, right? Maybe you have a group of 8 people and you're trying to put together a symposium or an event on campus. You have a team of 4 that's focused on advertising and marketing, trying to get people to attend, and another team of 4 that's focused on putting together the agenda for the event itself, right? Letting people work together to figure out how to divide up is a great way to do that. If you've ever had to do like a group presentation or project for a class, there's a good chance you had to do that kind of subdividing yourself. I'll work on this first half of the assignment, and I'll work on the second half. And letting people even deal with conflicts on their own is a really good approach. Yes, as a leader, you're inevitably going to have to deal with like the drama that comes from, you know, people that come to you on the gymnastics team, right? But at the same time, it feels really good to know that members of your group might deal with conflict and problems on their own, but are able to work together and figure it out themselves. That you are sort of a last resort if members of your group can't figure it out. So that's one way of thinking about dealing with conflict in groups. The last thing I want to hit on is the idea that we can create these teams for learning, right? That members of a group are here to learn. That we can use things like attendance and participation to track who's there and able to attend meetings. That we offer the opportunity. Somebody's struggling and needs extra help to reach out to them individually, get them on track. Maybe you have a member of a group who's sitting in a corner and not participating. Reaching out to them can be a great way to ensure that they feel included. Figuring out, you know, maybe a member of the group isn't contributing or openly sharing their thoughts, the signs that they might need support. And then lastly, using things like breakout rooms, chat, online sort of open houses or spaces for people to talk are ways that you can help people engage online too, right? The idea here being that members of the team or group are here to learn and collaborate with one another. So given some of the things that we hit on, what I want you to do as your second part of attendance for today is think about this scenario. So Susan is working on creating a new study group on campus for chemistry. Has a lot of big midterms and exams in chemistry. Who wants to create a good study group to work together? But the problem is, as a leader, she's having a difficult time making that group go. So what I want you to think about is what we talked about for today. Apply that to think about what she can do to create the successful team or group. And I want you to think about as specifically as possible some solutions or actions Susan could take to help the group go well. And then secondarily, and fairly similarly, right, what can Susan do to be a good leader? Leading the study group, trying to get members of that group to work together effectively is going to take some work. So prescribe Susan some opportunities to create a good meeting work together. So if you've wrapped up, what I'd like you to do is to turn to a person or group of three that's near you, and just take a moment to share what some of the suggestions you had for Susan's work. As you're doing so, kind of note the similarities you have in your suggestions on how Susan can facilitate a good group. And for folks on Zoom, I'll go ahead and create some breakout rooms to give you a little bit of time to chat. So go ahead and go ahead and take a minute just to share some of the ideas or thoughts that you have on how to create a good experience for Susan's group.
Hello. How are you guys It's a wonderful. Mangoes,
See, that's great, right? You have other people in the class in the group you could observe that work really well.
next Monday. That's on 3:36. I said that she could, let's see. Oh, first step in the other group, probably.
Oh, really?
Not as a being a leader, but also seeing what she would want to be a leader, maybe.
Really? I saw you guys walk up there, but I figured it. How many of you guys have ever said fun?
I would have to define what you expect out of the group. I'll offer the members to master the moment their own personality, subject matter, and experiences. What I know about being. I would also have Susan get to know the group. I would have Susan actively demonstrate the participation she would like to see among the group.
Some really good ideas that I've heard as I was listening to some of you talk. Also, one thing to think about, mentioned over here to this group, is that you're also welcome to reach out to folks in the class that might be part of clubs or activities that have meetings too. So you have folks in this class or in other classes, you want to say, hey, can I go to your meeting for this group? That's a really great way to reach out and work on that part of your assignment. I haven't thought of that, but that's definitely a great thing to do. A few things that I noticed from some of the points and ideas that you brought up. The idea of really having a clear agenda, what content you're hoping to do in that study session. For instance, we're going to talk about this chapter today on covalent bonding, right? Might be a really good way to set out the expectations of the group. Having things like breaks, maybe bringing in snacks, making things kind of fun, giving people the opportunity to come and go a little bit, feel more comfortable, can definitely play a really big role too. Giving people the opportunity to get to know each other using casual conversation, or maybe an icebreaker or two to let people get to know each other better. Those are all things that can create this good environment. So if you find yourself hosting or creating a study group yourself, you might think about these kind of good leadership and learning environment practices as a way to make your study group go well. So to wrap up for today, we spent some time talking about leadership the way that leaders can create an opportunity for people to learn and to work together effectively. The idea that group leaders find themselves thrust in situations. We might not have to become the president because we're next in line, but we do have to have situations where we're not expected to lead, but we have to. We can lean on the things that we do well to make it go effectively. And then the idea that there's this active teamwork and collaboration that's necessary too. For Friday, we're going to discuss some of the challenges and issues that can happen as we're working as leaders, including things like groupthink and how we can address some of those problems as we work together in groups. So go ahead and pass forward or email me your attendance for today if you haven't done so already. Have a great rest of your morning. See you Friday.